The year was 2053, and humanity had finally done it. First contact. After decades of radio signals and fleeting, unexplained encounters, the world stood in awe as a fleet of shimmering, organic ships descended through Earth's atmosphere. They didn't come like the movies depicted, with fire and fury. There was no invasion, no sudden flashes of light from the sky. The Zarkorians, as they introduced themselves, arrived in silence, their ships forming a massive, glowing ring over the planet. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, a lead astrophysicist working for the United Nations' first interstellar outreach program, was the first to decode their transmission. It wasn't a language in the traditional sense, no strings of words or symbols. Instead, it was a series of harmonious sounds, like the ringing of a cosmic bell. But what shocked her the most was its message. Peace, cooperation, an invitation to join a galactic community of peaceful, advanced species. At first, the world was in disbelief. The first images of the Zarkorians, when they appeared on Earth's global news feeds, showed them as beings of light and energy, their forms fluid, never entirely solid. They had no mouths, no eyes in the human sense, but their presence exuded calm, radiating serenity. Their leader, Jara, addressed the UN Assembly in a voice that was both melodic and deeply compelling, despite the lack of any vocal cords. They had come to offer the knowledge of the stars and guide humanity to the next stage of its evolution. It was a dream come true. Yet, not everyone shared the same excitement. Captain Alex Carter, a grizzled former Marine turned head of the Earth Defense Coalition, was not so easily charmed. When the news broke, he was on a military base in Nevada, running drills with a small crew of top-tier soldiers. He'd seen too much of the galaxy to buy into any idealistic utopia. The Zarkorians' peaceful offer seemed almost too perfect, too polished, and that set off alarms in his military mind. He wasn't alone. His old friend, Major Rachel Adams, now a senior advisor to the United Nations Security Council, shared his concerns. "Look, I don't care how enlightened they sound. We don't know who or what they really are," Rachel said, tapping her fingers on the table as she scrolled through the alien transmission. What if this is all some kind of ruse? But there were no signs of deception. The Zarkorians' technologies were beyond anything humanity had seen. Energy fields that bent the laws of physics, medical advancements that could cure diseases Earth had struggled with for centuries. Their message was clear: join us, and you will flourish. It sounded perfect, too perfect. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that peace, in the way the Zarkorians promised, was more dangerous than it appeared. He had seen what happened when people let their guard down. As the first joint missions between Earth and the Zarkorians began, he felt a growing unease. He watched from a distance, trying to stay neutral, but something about the Zarkorian calm made him feel like they were too detached from the struggle of survival that humans knew all too well. And as Earth prepared to welcome its new allies, Alex Carter had a gut feeling that something was coming, something the Zarkorians weren't prepared for, something that humanity would have to face alone. It didn't take long for Alex's instincts to prove right. 6 months after the Zarkorians' arrival, the universe's peaceful facade was shattered in a single violent moment. It began with a distant, barely perceptible tremor in space, like the sudden shift of a star. But it wasn't a natural event. The Porath had arrived. The Porath were not the kind of species anyone would mistake for a peaceful diplomat. A race of hulking warriors with jagged exoskeletal armor and crimson eyes, they were known throughout the galaxy for their brutality and lust for conquest. They had razed entire worlds, wiping out civilizations in their wake, and they had no interest in peace. For them, the universe was nothing but a series of battlegrounds to dominate. They were a scourge, and their fleet was massive. Dozens of warships, each the size of a small moon, arriving like a swarm of locusts. Alex had been called in to consult on Earth's defense strategy, but he knew immediately that nothing in humanity's arsenal could match the Porath's overwhelming firepower. These weren't the standard galactic invaders either. No, the Porath had a reputation for laying waste to civilizations, utterly annihilating any resistance. The Zarkorians had been unprepared. Their philosophy of peace had made them vulnerable in ways no one could have predicted. The first Porath assault struck a Zarkorian outpost on the moon of Vulture 7, an idyllic, research-focused colony that was a symbol of their peaceful outreach to humanity. The Porath came in waves, their ships turning the surface into an inferno of molten rock as they bombarded the station with weapons that tore through space itself. Within hours, the outpost was gone. No warning, no negotiation, just violence. Jara, the Zarkorian leader, appeared on Earth's global network in a state of shock. "We did not expect this," she said, her voice trembling for the first time since she'd arrived on Earth. "The Porath are not like us. They seek destruction for destruction's sake." On Earth, chaos spread as military analysts scrambled to make sense of the situation. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session, and the world's leaders argued furiously about how to respond. Most of the Earth Defense Coalition was in favor of retaliation, but that was where the problem began. The Zarkorians couldn't retaliate. It wasn't in their nature. And that's when Alex Carter, already growing wary of the Zarkorians' pacifism, made a bold decision. Despite the risk of alienating his government, he began preparing a plan, not for peace, but for war. "If the Zarkorians can't fight, then humanity must," Alex muttered, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. "We'll defend them if it's the last thing we do." But the question hung in the air. Would the Zarkorians allow themselves to fight, or would they simply surrender to their invaders? The first wave of Porath ships was just the beginning. The days following the Porath attack on Vulture 7 were tense, filled with hushed meetings behind closed doors and urgent calls to action. The world watched as the Zarkorians retreated into themselves, their representatives growing more distant. They were not running from the Porath, but their unwillingness to retaliate made them seem passive, fragile even. The human military, led by Alex Carter, was gearing up for war. But the Zarkorians, despite their extraordinary technological advantages, remained locked in a moral struggle. Jara, the Zarkorian leader, appeared before the Earth Defense Coalition, her form flickering with radiant energy, but even her light could not mask the deep sorrow in her voice. "We cannot fight," she declared softly, her words carrying the weight of centuries of nonviolence. "Our entire philosophy is rooted in the belief that to take a life, any life, is to destroy the very essence of existence itself. We cannot become like them." Alex felt his teeth grit as he watched the scene unfold. He understood the Zarkorian ethos. Their commitment to peace was deeply embedded in their culture. But in the face of the Porath's savagery, it seemed like an impractical luxury. Humanity, for all its faults, knew how to survive. In the end, survival was more important than philosophy. But how could he convince the Zarkorians? It wasn't just a military issue. It was a matter of their identity. The Zarkorians had never known war, never even entertained the possibility of combat. They had created societies based on balance, sharing, and cooperation. To fight would be to betray everything they stood for. Alex understood this intellectually, but his gut told him that inaction would cost them everything. Late one night, as Alex sat in his office, staring at a holographic map of the galaxy, he received an unexpected visitor. Jara herself. She entered without a word, her form shimmering as she moved through the door, a quiet force of gravity that seemed to pull the room into stillness. "Captain Carter," she began, her voice almost a whisper, "I am torn. My people are torn. I can see the logic in your approach, but our hearts cry out against it. Violence breeds violence, and I fear that once we begin, we will never be able to stop." Alex stood and faced her, his eyes hard. "Jara, the Porath will not stop. Not until they've wiped out your people. You think they care about your philosophy. They only understand one thing: power. And if we don't show them that we can fight back, We'll lose everything." Her form flickered, a sign of inner turmoil. She hovered, silent for a moment, before finally speaking. "I know. But how do we fight without becoming the very thing we despise?" Alex didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he knew one thing. If the Zarkorians didn't fight, humanity would have to fight alone. The battle for Volta 7 had just been the beginning. The Porath were coming for Earth, and time was running out. The question was no longer whether they could win, but whether the Zarkorians could overcome their own ideology in time to survive. The days following his conversation with Zhara were marked by a grim sense of urgency. Alex Carter couldn't wait for the Zarkorians to make up their minds. Earth needed to prepare for war, and if the Zarkorians refused to fight, humanity would face the Porath alone. But there was a sliver of hope. Zhara had made a decision. They would train. She didn't know if they could fully embrace the harsh realities of battle, but she was willing to take the first step. She had seen enough of the Porath's devastation to know that survival was now at stake. If they didn't fight, they would be wiped out without a trace. Alex worked with Major Rachel Adams, his longtime friend and tactical partner, to begin what seemed like an impossible task: teaching the Zarkorians the art of war. They set up a joint training facility in the isolated deserts of Nevada, far from the prying eyes of the public and the media. The Zarkorians, whose forms flickered with shifting patterns of light, were a strange sight on Earth's battlefields. They weren't human, and they didn't have physical bodies in the conventional sense, but they had something far more powerful: their minds. The training was unlike anything Alex had ever done before. The Zarkorians didn't need weapons or combat drills in the traditional sense. Instead, their ability to process information at an exponential rate made them ideal students of strategy. They could calculate entire battle plans in the blink of an eye, adapting to new situations faster than any human. But teaching them to use that ability in combat was the real challenge. They had to overcome their deepest instinct: to avoid harm, to never strike the first blow. Captain Carter had no patience for gentle persuasion. He needed results. He began with psychological tactics, explaining to the Zarkorians the realities of war, the consequences of doing nothing. He didn't sugarcoat it. "If you don't fight," he told them, "the Porath will destroy you all, and your children will never know peace again." Dr. Emily Rodriguez, who had been working with the Zarkorians since their arrival, helped develop a new type of training regimen tailored to their unique biology. Using advanced neurofeedback technology, she was able to synchronize their natural mental patterns with human military tactics. It was difficult at first. Some Zarkorians resisted, overwhelmed by the violent images and emotions the simulations triggered. They recoiled at the concept of taking lives, even in simulated environments. But slowly, under Alex's relentless guidance, the Zarkorians began to adapt. They started learning how to anticipate the movements of their enemies, how to plan ambushes, how to use the terrain to their advantage. There were moments of tension. Zhara, especially, would often meditate quietly after each training session, torn between what she believed was right and the reality of the situation. But every day they grew stronger. They became more than just a peaceful race. They were learning to fight, not out of hatred, but out of necessity. And in that grueling process of transformation, something unexpected began to happen. Humanity and the Zarkorians were becoming something more than allies. They were becoming partners, bound by a shared goal. The Porath wouldn't know what hit them. By the time the first wave of Porath ships arrived at Earth's outer orbit, the Zarkorians had undergone a remarkable transformation. They were no longer the peaceful, pacifist race that had first arrived on Earth. They had learned to strategize, to use the terrain to their advantage, and to react quickly to threats. But despite their progress, Alex knew that humanity's advantage was still something the Zarkorians couldn't replicate: human resilience. Alex had seen it firsthand. It wasn't just about tactics or weapons. It was about grit. Humans didn't always win because they were the smartest or the most powerful, but because they never gave up, no matter the odds. The Zarkorians had their intellect, their calmness under pressure, but humanity had heart, and Alex intended to teach them to use that. The night before the battle, as Earth's combined fleet prepared to engage the Poreth, Alex gathered his most trusted soldiers in a briefing room on the U.S. Valor, Earth's flagship. Among them was Maria Gonzalez, a logistics expert who had transitioned into a combat strategist after the Poreth invasion began. She was sharp, calculating, and had an instinct for seeing patterns others missed. Alex knew that her mind, combined with the Zarkorians' advanced tech, would give them an edge. "Here's the plan," Alex said, his voice steady despite the weight of the coming battle. "The Poreth are going to expect a conventional fight. They think they can crush us with their overwhelming firepower, but they've underestimated humanity. We're going to show them just how unpredictable we can be." Maria's eyes flicked to the holographic map of the Poreth fleet hovering above the table. "The Poreth won't expect the Zarkorian tech to be so integrated with ours," she said. "If we can catch them off guard, we can do more damage than they anticipate." Zara, now more confident than ever, stood beside Alex. She had embraced the human concept of strategic deception, something that still sat uncomfortably with her, but she had learned that sometimes survival required flexibility. Her shimmering form was now fully aligned with Earth's military tactics, and she had become as much a part of the battle strategy as any human officer. Alex tapped the map. "We're not just attacking with firepower. We're going to take the fight to their minds. We'll use psychological warfare to keep them on edge, to make them question their every move. The Zarkorians are masters of misdirection, and I'll bet the Poreth won't even see it coming." The plan was risky, but Alex knew that without it, they would lose. If they didn't fight like humans, if they didn't rely on their creativity and unpredictable nature, they would fall into the trap of fighting just like the Poreth. And that was a fight they couldn't win. As the Valor and the rest of the fleet moved into position, Alex stood by the command deck, watching the distant stars. The Zarkorians had learned to fight, yes, but humanity would show them how to win. And that was the real edge. The first volley from the Poreth fleet came without warning, as expected, but Alex had anticipated their brutal approach. The Poreth didn't know subtlety. They didn't need to. Their ships were massive, and their weaponry could turn a moon into dust with a single shot. What they didn't expect was the human and Zarkorian alliance's ability to think. The battle took place over Vorkan, a desolate moon in the Zarkorian colony system. Its barren landscape and lack of atmospheric interference made it the perfect stage for the opening confrontation. As the Earth fleet and the Zarkorian ships deployed in formation, Alex stood at the command center of the Valor, watching the holographic displays flicker with incoming data. "First wave inbound," Maria Gonzalez reported, her fingers flying across the tactical console. "They're sending in their capital ships first. No surprise there. But they're spreading their forces thin to cover the whole moon. They think they'll overwhelm us with numbers." "Good," Alex said, his voice calm but hard. "We'll use that." The Valor and the Zarkorian ships launched into the fray, weaving around incoming fire with unexpected speed. Alex had briefed the fleet on how to use the Zarkorians' ability to manipulate energy fields to their advantage. Their ships, though not as heavily armored as the Poreths, could deflect energy blasts with near-perfect precision. But what really made the difference was the way the Zarkorians used their intellect to outmaneuver the Poreth's brute force. They used their ability to predict the Poreth's next moves, their fleet seeming to dance through the onslaught with unnatural grace. On the ground, the Zarkorian infantry had adapted to human military tactics. They had learned to move in formations, setting traps for the Poreth soldiers. They didn't fight out of hatred or anger. They fought because they had to, for survival. In the foothills of the Vorkan Mountains, a group of Zarkorian soldiers, led by Captain Alex Carter himself, lured a Poreth assault team into a canyon, where a mix of Zarkorian energy shields and human tech created a trap that trapped their enemy in a devastating crossfire. For every Poreth warship that tried to break through their defenses, The Alliance retaliated with swift, almost poetic precision. The Zarkorians would create false energy readings, tricking the Porath into pursuing phantom targets, while the humans hit from unexpected angles, drawing the enemy into ambushes. For the first time in the battle, the Porath were on the defensive, their usual confidence shaken by an opponent they hadn't been prepared for. Jara, commanding the Zarkorian fleet from their flagship, used her mental abilities to communicate with her people, coordinating moves faster than any human could. She was no longer just the figurehead leader who spoke of peace. She was a tactician, a general. Alex, standing next to her, was amazed at how far they had come. He had always known humanity's strength in war, but seeing the Zarkorians adapt, blending their intellect with the unpredictability of human strategy, had created something formidable. The tide was turning, but the Porath weren't going to give up easily. Alex knew this was only the beginning. The Porath would retaliate, but now the Alliance had a fighting chance. "Stay sharp," he ordered. "This battle isn't over yet." The universe was watching, and it would never be the same again. The victory at Vorken was a turning point, but it came at a cost. The Porath had been driven back, their ships limping home with broken hulls and shattered morale, but the battle was far from over. As the Zarkorian and human forces celebrated their hard-won victory, something deeper was stirring within the Alliance, a fracture that had been growing ever since the first human soldiers began training the Zarkorians to fight. The victory on Vorken hadn't erased the moral conflict that simmered beneath the surface of Zarkorian society. For every Zarkorian soldier who had adapted to the new methods of warfare, there was another who recoiled at the violence. A faction of Zarkorians, led by a respected leader named Chorus, began to question their involvement in the conflict. Chorus and his followers had always been ardent pacifists, even among a race that held peace above all else, and the brutality of war had shaken their faith in the alliance with humanity. One evening, as the Zarkorian fleet regrouped in the aftermath of the battle, Chorus came to Jara with an ultimatum. "We have betrayed everything our ancestors taught us," Chorus said, his voice low and heavy with emotion. "We were supposed to be the bringers of peace, the guardians of harmony. But look at us. We are no different than the Porath. You cannot lead us down this path." Jara, her form flickering with the intensity of her emotions, responded with a rare hint of desperation. "You don't understand, Chorus. The Porath are not like us. They will destroy us all if we do not fight back. We are not becoming like them. We are protecting what we are, what we stand for." But Chorus wasn't convinced. "Peace is not the absence of conflict, Jara. Peace is the ability to resist hatred, to maintain your identity even in the face of destruction. You have lost your way. We have lost our way." The rift between the pacifists and the warriors began to grow. Chorus and his faction withdrew from the war efforts, retreating to their ships and refusing to participate in further combat. They called for Jara to end the alliance with humanity, believing that the cost of war was too great for their people to bear. Alex watched the situation unfold with growing concern. He had always known the Zarkorians were not a warlike race, but he hadn't anticipated this kind of internal fracture. If the Zarkorians pulled out of the alliance now, humanity would be left exposed to the full wrath of the Porath. Worse, it might give the Porath the opening they needed to launch a devastating counterattack. Rachel Adams, who had been on the front lines of every engagement, shared his worry. "If they break, we'll lose their fleet. And without them, the Porath will crush us." Alex knew what had to be done. "I'll talk to Jara. We can't afford to let this tear us apart. Not now." But even as Alex prepared to meet with the Zarkorian leader, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this war wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something much deeper. For both humans and Zarkorians, the real question was not how to win the battle, but whether they could live with themselves after the war was over. The conflict between the Zarkorians reached a boiling point. As the days passed, the rift deepened. Chorus and his followers refused to fight, retreating to the outskirts of the fleet, casting doubt on Jara's leadership. The Zarkorian warriors, those who had embraced the brutal necessity of the war, felt betrayed, their morale crumbling as their allies stood down. Alex Carter found himself torn. He had never thought he'd become a mediator in a conflict like this, but the stakes were higher than ever. Without the Zarkorians, Earth would stand alone against the Poreth, a force that had already proven capable of eradicating civilizations in a matter of days. And yet, he understood Korra's anguish. The Zarkorians had been forced into a role they never asked for, and war, as brutal as it was a wound that could scar even the most noble of civilizations. He traveled to the Zarkorian command ship, the Serenity, to meet with Jara. Her form shimmered faintly, as though the weight of the decisions before her were pulling at her very essence. "Alex," Jara greeted him with a solemn voice. "I am afraid it is too late. Chorus and his followers have made their decision. They will not fight. I cannot force them." Alex, weary but resolute, stepped forward. "Jara, this isn't just about war. It's about your people's survival. If you let this split continue, if you let your people walk away from this fight, you will have lost everything. Your peace will be nothing more than ashes." Jara faltered, her form flickering uncertainly. "How can I lead them into battle again when they no longer trust me? They believe I have abandoned the principles we hold dear. And maybe," she hesitated, as if unsure of her own thoughts, "maybe they are right." Alex placed a hand on her shimmering surface. "No one's asking you to abandon everything you stand for. But this is war. There is no peace in the face of annihilation. You've already shown them a way to survive without losing yourself. But you can't be afraid of the consequences." A long silence fell between them. Jara, deep in thought, finally spoke again. "You are right. If I do not act, we risk losing everything. And not just for us. The Poreth will come for your people next." With a sudden surge of determination, Jara's light became brighter, more resolute. She turned toward the comms panel, her voice firm. "I will speak to Chorus. If I can't convince him to rejoin the fight, I will lead my people alone. The Poreth cannot be allowed to win." Alex nodded, turning to leave. "We're counting on you, Jara. We're counting on all of you." Hours later, the Zarkorian fleet was back in formation, its once doubtful commanders now ready to fight. The combined Earth-Zarkorian forces stood unified against the approaching Poreth fleet, which had regrouped and was now barreling toward Earth, their blood-red ships blotting out the stars. The final battle was upon them. The Poreth, no longer expecting such fierce resistance, hesitated as the Alliance's forces prepared for the inevitable clash. The energy from the Zarkorian ships crackled through space, enhanced by the human ingenuity of their weaponry. Humanity and the Zarkorians, their differences momentarily forgotten, were a united front. But it would be the last stand. The battle was brutal, lasting for hours as the Poreth rained destruction down upon Earth's defenses. Yet, despite the odds, humanity and the Zarkorians fought back with a ferocity that left the Poreth reeling. For every ship that fell, there were two more to take its place. The Poreth began to falter, their overconfidence shattering as the Alliance exploited their weaknesses. By the time the battle was over, the Poreth fleet had been decimated, their survivors fleeing into the dark reaches of space. Earth and the Zarkorians had won, not just through sheer power, but through unity, innovation, and sacrifice. As Alex watched the remaining Poreth ships vanish into the stars, he turned to Jara. "You did it. We did it." Jara's form pulsed with quiet pride. "No, we did it together. We will rebuild, not just our worlds, but our ideals." And so, the alliance that had once seemed impossible, humans, Zarkorians, had forged a new path. They had found peace in the hardest of ways, not by avoiding conflict, but by embracing their differences, their flaws, and ultimately, their shared strength. The universe would never be the same.